So we're back here with Ralph Bakshi discussing film and cinema. And now, Ralph, you've always had an interest in fantasy for a long time, and you've been drawing fantasy even since you back as your high school days. Tell us about Wizards, Lord of the Rings, Fire and Ice. You really reinvented fantasy in cinema.
Okay, fantasy. Now, the great thing, I grew up in the 60s, and fantasy was a very big deal. Lord of the Rings, the books, were basically a rumor when you talk to cartoonists. You heard the name Lord of the Rings, you had no idea what it was about. Some people thought it was about a wedding, but mainly through artists. Now, you can't be a cartoonist without loving fantasy, because the great thing, in the 60s, I was reading Robert E. Howard, Conan, before I read Lord of the Rings, and science fiction. The 50s, and again, we're back to what's, when you're in your time, things can't be duplicated. There was a great explosion of UFO stories in the 50s, science fiction pocketbooks that were very big deals, and annuals, and fantasy, and Robert E. Howard, pulp writers, of whom Robert E. Howard, who invented Conan and other characters, were sensational. And then you had this great artist, Frank Frazetta, start to paint fantasy covers for these various pulp covers to sell these different stories. And Roy J. Crinkle, who taught Frank Frazetta all about fantasy costuming and everything. They were both very good friends. Both of them lived in Brooklyn. You could not get away from Frank's great artwork, nor would you want to, Roy Crinkle, and the stuff I was reading. Now, the great thing about fantasy was that it's you see, it's interesting. You have Disney and Warner Brothers and all that stuff, but fantasy is fantasy, but it's not. It's more real than Disney and Warner Brothers. In other words, Conan with the villains and the barbarians was more realistic, which is the direction I was kind of floating towards, than you would imagine. So it was quite not unusual for me to go. You could say more things I realized at a certain point in Wizards, which came before Tolkien, that you could say more in fantasy, or as much in fantasy as I said in Coonskin. Because in fantasy, under the guise of fantasy and the realism, there's a great area of science fiction, truth, and fiction. So fantasy isn't as when people think of fantasy, they think of, Alice in Wonderland and Once Upon a Star, those Disney versions and other people. When I think of fantasy, I think of what they're saying, or what they could be saying underneath all this shimmering stuff on top. So I went to fantasy. Now, why did I go to fantasy? I needed a break. You have to understand, after Coons, everything that happened to me caused a great blow. When, we could talk about it now, but I was still trying to get pencil tests from my animators. And I was way behind in payments on my film because the problems I had was costing me money. You have to understand, I was putting my director's money into supporting the studio, the things I made as a director. Because if Coons can tell him his face, because Paramount dropped it, there was no income coming in. So I wanted to get away from the controversy. I was tired, I was burnt out. It was Fritz, it was traffic. You didn't talk about Hey Good Looking, a film they tore up. Because in Hey Good Looking, I don't want to get into it, but they ripped it up because there was a black gang in it. They said that was wrong. They never distributed that. So Coonskin, these are big blows. So I'm trying to get away from it. So I write Wizards as a break, but I write Wizards without losing any feeling about what I'm all about. I mean, Wizards wasn't a sellout as opposed to my other films. So it's fine. In other words, but it can be construed as a non-Bakshi movie to the movie companies to show them that I had become a good boy. In other words, I was desperate to keep the studio open, and I thought I'd fake him out. And how do you fake him out? What I'm great at is you do a fantasy. They think it's a fantasy. That's how I was doing Disney some fiction. I even I even designed the characters from the old Disney 30 kind of look. Cute cheeks, but teeth, a little fairy that big. So yeah, all this I knew. And yeah, it's exactly, they bought it, boom, boom, they love it. Okay.
But it's actually an anti-war film, isn't it?
That's right. Oh,
Yeah.
it's an anti-war film.
Yeah.
It's also a film that claims rape. If you don't watch, it's a film that says to democracies, if you don't watch out for fascism, it's coming back. So I throw stock footage of Hitler and his troops in the sky, and my God, here they are today. If you don't take care of democracy, fascism will come back. I also used a great film director, which I didn't talk about, which also taught me a lot on all my films, on the craft of directing, how to cut, how to tell a story, was Sir Eisenstein, the great Russian silent film director, who did Alexander Nevsky and the Potemkin Steps. And I was nuts about the way he staged, his camera angles. I just loved the way he worked. I used his stock footage in Wizards. All the battle scenes come from Alexander Nevsky and all those guys are all. I put red eyes on them and horns, but they were footage. Again, no money. And what do in Wizards? You use what's available to you, which is great. I mean, I would have, had I had the money, I would have animated it. It wouldn't have looked as good in the battle scene as using the stock footage from Nevsky. It's crazy. But what I'm telling young directors is sometimes if you're really trying to do something and you don't have the money to do it, if you keep thinking and mulling it over, there may be an answer that's better for you if you had the money. And I was lucky enough to say, hey, I could use stock footage, but stock footage of a certain quality. In other words, it just can't be stock footage. The great thing about Alexander Nevsky in those black and white movies was the textures. It's how it looked. It's the grain in it. Everything about it said, I am stock footage. I am also real. I mean, so you have to, there are artistic choices in everything you do. So it's not a question of using a photograph for a background, which is cheap. It's what kind of photograph you use. I basically want to make sure that's very clear with the artists out there. It's not just a question of using a cheaper item. It's trying to find the right texture and image that this item has that's right for the movie and not wrong. I can use photographs of New York in coonskin that were entirely wrong and would not have worked. The same thing in Fritz or Heavy Traffic. So how did I get to these photographs? It's a question of taste. It's a question of loving the 1950s street photographers. It's a question of loving all the guys that shot on the street in the New York School of Photography, Ouija, Arbus, a host of these guys that I loved so much. Again, I'm back to the beginning of our conversation. This is the stuff I am looking at growing up. I'm looking at these guys. I am not looking at Snow White. So these images are training me as an artist, my taste, Miles Davis. But these photographers, had I used the wrong photographs in the movies, had I used some slick version of a battle scene, it wouldn't work. It was Nevsky. It was the grainy, it was newsreel footage. I had a plane blow up in Heavy Traffic, a wing fall off. That was the best shot I've ever seen in my life. When Shorty hits a guy, I cut to an airplane, a very famous shot of a B-52 getting blown up in the sky over Germany, and its wing breaks and it, boom, punch, crash, airplane. It's the right image. So the same thing is true when you're hiring background artists. Even though I'm changing style in every sequence, I hire the right background artist for the film. That's choices you have to make. So it's not just using these tricks. It's trying to use these tricks with some thought behind the tricks as to what would make them work.
Yeah. Lord of the Rings. Back then, I mean, that everybody's of course familiar with Peter Jackson, what he's done, and the original intention was to create two films. I understand you did the one. What were the biggest challenges? Oh, three. You want to do three as well? Okay. What were the biggest challenges and the rewards in creating Lord of the Rings?
All right. I'll try to make it quicker. All right. I was reading Lord of the Rings at home in the pocketbooks, the original pocketbooks, before I did Wizard. I was a huge fan of Rings. Every time I come home from work, I would relax and read Lord of the Rings. Book one, book two, book three. I think Lord of the Rings is the single greatest fantasy I've ever read or anyone could read. That's my opinion. Absolutely, hands down, adult and wonderful. Never read anything like it. And I read a lot of kids' books on young Rapunzel and the Grimm's fairy tales, the pea in the pod. You can take that with a grain of salt. Rings, amazing and dark and exciting. Okay. So I loved it. And with Rings, my input from Rings had helped me write Wizards. Let me be very clear. I couldn't have written Wizards without having read the Rings. All right. So, I mean, that's how much I love fantasy. Let's be very clear. So, okay. I mean, was Avatar Gandalf? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Was Avatar? No, probably. Brooklyn, my Brooklyn Gandalf. And then, seriously. So, at any rate, so I'm sitting in my studio worrying about what I'm worrying about. And I read that United Artists is making Lord of the Rings with a film director. And he's taken all three books and making one screenplay about it. And they're going to add new characters to it to make it work. Disney was the first to own Lord of the Rings rights in Disney, but sold them to United Artists because they felt it was too dark to make. So Disney had the first rights to Lord of the Rings, sold it to United Artists, and they were going to make it. Well, they can't do that. Here I am, I'm Fred Silverman again, I'm up against the back of the wall, I'm taking care of the presentations. They can't do that. I love it. They can't do that. They're going to ruin it. They can't make, and the outrage I felt of making three books, the director says, and he'll create new characters if it's needed. He's going to create new. So I make an appointment with United Artists. Now, you have to understand that whenever I picked up a phone and called someone, they allowed me to come up because they never knew what was going to happen. So no one ever I didn't have an agent. I'm on my own. Another mistake I made. I should have had some slick agent, but I couldn't stand them. No, but I should have had one. It would have helped me. So I made a lot of mistakes. So I go up to see Mike Medavoy at United Artists, who owned the rights. I said, Mike, you can't do three pictures in one and you can't do this. It's Lord of the Rings. Because Ralph, to tell you the truth, we hate it. And to tell you the truth, Ralph, we don't want to make it. But we paid the director $3 million to write the script. I said, can I read the script? He says, we don't want to read the script. It's too big. We don't want to read the script. I said, so what are you going to do? He says, Ralph, we'll give you the rights. We'll give you the rights if you get us back the $3 million we paid this director. Now, he has given me Lord of the Rings rights for nothing. The biggest book of the 60s is for nothing. If I get back his $3 million for a screenplay. Now, you have to understand my mouth dropped open because I had $1 million or two to make a film. Here's a guy that's getting $3 million to write words. $3 million for a screen. I mean, this is, to me, incredible. I didn't say it. I looked cool. I was cool. All right, now United Artists. I can't believe me. United Artists was housed in the same building with MGM Studios. In those days, studios were shrinking So they took quarters together. And in MGM Studios, which was across the hall from United Artists, was a great producer running MGM Studios film department, Fred Melnick. Now Melnick had done all that jazz. He'd done a great. He cut together all those MGM musicals. He did some great intellectual work. He really was a smart guy. So I said, okay, Medavoy. So I'll leave his office. I crossed the hall. I go to Dan Melnick's office at MGM, which is 500 feet away. I go inside, and the secretary says, yes. I said, I want to see Dan Melnick. She says, do you have an appointment? He's in with somebody. I said, no. They're like, you can't see. You just can't walk in here and see Dan Melnick. I said, listen, you want to get fired? If you don't tell, they had these things you typed into their phone or something. I don't know what it was. If you ring Melnick and tell him that Ralph Bakshi is outside with the rights to Lord of the Rings, if you don't do that and I walk out of here without you telling him that, he'll fire you. She looks at me, she says, okay. So she was right, smart. She said, okay, that's why I use that. Because it was the truth. That would have been the truth. I was not lying to her. Well, I think I was not lying to her. I always believe in what I'm thinking about. I go ahead. I don't question myself. This is right. This is right. Wrong. I'll take the blows. So she does something, and the door swings open. A minute later, the door swings open to his office, and Dan Melnick steps out. Says, Ralph, do you really have the rights to? Dan knew me from reputation. I'd never met him before. He said, now mind you, this is me walking around Hollywood. This doesn't happen. So Dan says, do you really have rights to Lord of the Rings? I said, yeah, Dan. He says, come on in. And he breaks up a meeting he was having with the director. The director comes out and never talks to me again, yells at me. And who was the director? Who was the guy who did Last Picture Show?
Peter Bogdanovich?
Peter Bogdanovich is pitching a film to Dan Melnick. Now, you have to understand, you can't get in these offices. To get in these offices to pitch a film, it's a major event in any director's life. And here is Peter Bogdanovich trying to pitch Melnick, one of the smartest guys in the business of picture, and I break up the meeting. Now, I didn't know he was in there. I said, I didn't know you were in there. Danny didn't have to come out. They could have told me to wait. I said, come on. Never spoke to me again. Thank God. At any rate, so I go to Danny. I tell him what I got. I want to animate this in 3 pictures. And all we need is to pay UA back $3 million for their screenplay. $3 million to Dan Melnick is like a lunch. That's like lunch at Ma Maison. He says, come on. We walk back across the hallway, back into Medavoy's office at United Artists. Danny gives him the money. Medavoy kisses me. This is like the Fred Silverman meeting. I love you, Ralph. Because it gets him off the hook for $3 million on a piece of crap called Lord of the Rings. And we walk back. And then I fly to, and then he calls my lawyer up. And that day, that very same day, my lawyer makes a deal with MGM to do 3 Lord of the Rings films. Now, that's not a bad day's work.
That's pretty good.
Now, now, I know most people out there won't believe this, but this is how I operate.
Yeah.
This is, for some reason, it's the same way. It's like everyone's going along normal paths. But I know everyone's got the same fears. I know instinctively everyone's got the same fears and worries and anxieties that everyone else has. I don't care who you are, from Marilyn Monroe to Dan Melnick to Frank Medavoy, who wants to save his job and just get him his $3 million. That if I called and said something interesting, they would see me. That I didn't have to stand on ceremony just by the fact that I did that.
Yeah,
already puts me in a bracket somewhere else. People don't do that. They go to lunch, they say hi at lunches, they sit down and say, you remember me? I did. Everyone's working the halls, as they say.
Yeah.
But I found out if you call and tell them you've got something to be interested in, they won't say no. They won't say no. Why would they say no?
Yeah.
If you have a reputation, and I had a reputation. It's not where I was nobody, I was me calling. So I knew that to be a fact.
Yeah.
So no, now you couldn't do that. No, it doesn't. So anyhow, so they made the deal. A week later, I flew to London. I wanted to tell the Tolkien family how I was going to make the film. I told Dan Melnick, if I don't get there okay, I'm not going to make the film. I wanted to let him know how I'm going to make it and what medium and why. And I spoke at lunch in Oxford to Tolkien's daughter to tell her. And she said, it sounds wonderful, Ralph, go right ahead. So I came back, and that's how I got the rights to Lord of the Rings.
That's amazing. Now, okay, so one story. Let's have one story. You filmed a lot of the live action, which would become rotoscoped in Spain. One story from Spain.
Say that again?
One story from Spain.
Okay, so okay, so I am shooting Helm's Deep at a castle in the middle of nowhere, freezing cold, in Spain, and I got orcs are going to attack the castle. I'm on top of it. The castle was a castle from the movie El Cid. It was the same castle I saw as a kid in the movie El Cid, and I was so happy to be on top of the same castle that Charles Heston rode out of as El Cid, dead on his horse. That's when he rode out dead, tied to his horse down the field. It was that castle I was shooting this in. It was the El Cid castle, they called it. Now, it was a very big scene. So what they did was, we went to, before that, the people gathered guys in town, in different small Spanish towns, hundreds of them. And they brought them in by bus to the location where they were all mourning, put in costumes, orc costumes. They were going to attack the castle from every town. And I spent all morning getting them dressed and positioning them in different Eisenstein, positions. Never forget that. It's Nevsky, I'm shooting now, not Eisenstein. In different Eisenstein layouts throughout this valley in front of the castle. On top of the castle are my gypsy stuntmen. All the stuntmen on the team were gypsies. And why were they gypsies? Is because they rode horses bareback. And they jumped off of the tops of walls like they were dead, boom. But they landed on cardboard boxes. You would not believe this. They were cardboard boxes that they built them up. The air pressure when they hit it would soften their blow. I'm terrified because these guys, I don't want anybody to kill themselves. But this is what they no, don't worry. All right. So all morning, most of the afternoon, all morning we're setting up hours and hours getting ready. And now I'm ready. I got 5 or 6 cameras placed everywhere to get different angles on the shot. I'm ready to shoot. I'm on a microphone on the wall, ready to say, so I say, start camera 1, start camera 2, start camera 3. I'm rolling. I'm ready to do the take. Everyone's been positioned. Everyone's got spears. They're ready to charge. And then I hear a bullhorn. And some guy gets up in the middle of this crowd and says, stop. Everyone looks at him. Stop. He says, it's time for lunch. Now, who is this guy? I had that in my mind. This guy is a local communist leader. He's a local communist leader who said it's time for lunch. The guy's got to eat. Lunch. I said, wait a minute. Everyone stands up in the field and starts walking towards the lunch area. I'm not getting the shot. So I can't believe what's happening. So I tell them to roll the cameras anyway. And again, using my head, to get what I can get. And in the film today, you'll see a lot of people walking away after Helm's Deep. The camera shot everyone, these guys in costume walking away.
Oh, you
And
know,
after Helm's Deep, I used a couple of cuts of the guys walking to lunch as being defeated. As being defeated in battle, they were walking away. So I got some use out of it. After lunch, we started again, and I got the shot before sundown. But that was a true story. I mean, you could not believe it. Time for lunch. He should have let me get the shot and then go to lunch. No, communist leader.
I don't know why, because
These are the things that happen to me. It don't happen to anyone else.
you know what, you seem to be
the
the way you get backed into a corner, but you pivot and you can turn those situations into the best thing that's happened. You know, whether it's getting the rights for this or getting that film done in television and things. Yeah, it's amazing.
Wait a minute. That's what we're talking about. See, that's really why I'm talking. I'm not talking this. See, I'm 82. I got thin arms. I'm talking about the opportunity for young filmmakers today to make their own films, to not to use these different visual attacks that you have in your head to your advantage instead of disadvantage if you have no money. I'm saying it could be done if you do it with taste and honesty. So that's what I'm really talking about. I'm not here telling funny stories, though they are funny.
Well,
I'm here to let people.
Let's talk to that point, because a lot of students will be watching this, and
That's why.
Yeah. So what advice would you have for students when people are out there? You have a lifetime of experience. So distilling that down and your observations and your own experience. And now, of course, you went from a period where it's theatrical and television feature, but also from analog to digital. All right. So big changes. What advice would you have for people today, students today?
Well, I want to be careful with this because I am not swimming in the ocean anymore. I'm not out there. I'm just painting and drawing and not really looking. But to the best of my ability, okay, one has ideas which have got to be very important. One has to approach his ideas with honesty, the best he could. And what does honesty mean? Honesty means you question yourself. I remember when I was doing Coonskin, I'd say, Ralph, let's see how much of a racist you are. And I'd ask myself questions on a list of paper. What if someone said this? So I question myself as well as other people to find out what I'm thinking about. So what's important to any honest filmmaker is write and do something you really feel something about. And make sure you ask yourself as many questions you ask other people. If you just do stuff in the sense of its commerciality, now, let me tell you something else. All my films were commercially planned. I might have done what I wanted, but the first Black animated film is a great commercial enterprise. The first R-rated movie, Fritz the Cat, is a great commercial enterprise. The first animated movie, Heavy Traffic. So I was thinking also as a producer, don't get me wrong, I wasn't on some sort of cloud. These were great ideas for the times commercially. The fact that I took them to their final conclusions, what nobody expected. Am I clear? So you have to understand I was not without thinking commercially. So if you're thinking commercially about a subject that you really love and you're honest about, and commercially meaning if it could be interesting to people, not just yourself. I talk a lot about being interesting to me. I want to please myself. That doesn't mean that I don't want to please other people. If it happens, more money, better studios, etc. You get paid for your work. I'm not against getting paid for your work. So today, artists have to think about what they want to make and how they want to make it. Then they have to decide technically what is available to them, and I think a lot, that they could do this film at no cost or very little cost. Then they have to decide then they have to use their judgment and their talent to decide, as I said earlier, what is good is what is bad, and I can't help them in that. Nobody could, all right? But it seems to me that there are so many avenues of producing films. Let me put it to you this way. Heavy Traffic costs under $1 million to make in my old matte film, old studio days. Heavy traffic would cost today on the computer or YouTube or one of these programs probably about $40,000, if not 30. So you could get it costs total finished. You ink and paint. I've been able to. I made a short film and I checked the cost. I could not believe what I was looking at. The entire studio I had on heavy traffic could fit in my computer box on that animation program. What's it called? I forget. Give me one.
Anyway, Toon Boom or something.
Toon Boom. Use Toon Boom. On Toon Boom, my computer right here in front of me, my entire animation studio lived. Just sat here doing whatever I want. So now it seems to me there can be, I'm not sure, to the best of my knowledge, there can be many venues of sales today, meaning everyone is streaming, everyone needs product. So my advice would be to get a bunch of guys together. This is bad or good advice. I can't get a bunch of guys together, decide who's directing, or directing get a bunch of guys together. Decide to make a film together. You cover all the costs yourself. If you can raise some money on Show Me or one of those programs, fine. But if you can't, you send everyone in your family to work. And you spend a year to get, other than yourself, and you spend a year with these bunch of guys making your own film. And then when you have it finished, which you can, because I'm telling you that the technology is here, then you could try to sell it or get an agent to try to sell it to any one of these thousands of venues that might be available. That's better to me than working for Pixar. Not that I just dislike Pixar, but that for me is a way that I would go, I think, today. I'm sure I would go that way today because it costs so little to make a movie. If you make a movie that does, well, if you write a movie on 100 million billion years of space travel, you're not going to get very far. But if you write a movie like Traffic or something on the computer, you have to make sure that what you're writing or trying to make has strength and power, but you could afford to make it well under. So again, you're back to judgment. What can I make well with Boom Toon or Toon Boom that I could afford to make in a year that doesn't hurt its quality because I'm really trying to make a simple film or a film that doesn't do that much but tells a story. So there are a lot of decisions the director's got to make. So it's not just one to use Toon Boom in your home. It's one, how much animation? Because if you write too big a film, you're going to fall in your face. Everything is going to fit like a puzzle. So Traffic and Fritz and Coon were all done in areas that I could handle at the animation level with no pencil test I was doing. That's why I needed rotoscope for Lord of the Rings. I couldn't do it that way anymore. I had to shoot it. But the other films were designed to be able to be done in the style I wanted. It's a balancing act that you have to do. And your times, your initial opening, the times you're in, the music, all the things that are passing through you are what determines. If you use my method and go back to my time, it's not the same. You didn't grow up with Jackson Pollock. You didn't grow up with Ouija. You didn't grow up with all the things I grew up with. You didn't grow up with World War II. You didn't grow up with all the stuff that made me what I was. You grew up with somewhere else. You grew up with Donald Trump and the whole and this crazy war in Afghanistan. There's a movie waiting to be made. I would love to make a movie on how we got involved in these wars.
It'd be interesting to see how these times, this last 16 months and 4 years of presidency and things, how it evolves into film and story and writing and cinema and music as well. But I think you touched on that aspect. One of the most powerful weapons that an artist can use is creativity and imagination.
There is no substitute. The bottom line to everything is, what are your choices? Are they good choices?
Yeah.
You know, forget the bravado, forget me walking into Melnick's office and all that stuff. That's just Brooklyn. No, that's just the way I grew up.
Yeah.
Or that's just that I knew how to do that. Or it's my background. Again, it's my background. I mean, you don't grow up in junior high school, an old boys school in Brownsville, Brooklyn, with all the teachers being ex-soldiers who are now teaching in front of desks. and I mean, this is tough stuff. You didn't open your mouth, you got your head beaten in. So I grew up in a different time. So if I speaking to Dan Melnick or walking into an office has nothing to do. It's so much easier than walking into a guy who was at Normandy saying, "Shut up, Ralph," and go back and make a sound, and it'll knock your head off. So once you grew up that way, which I did, going to Dan Melnick and saying, "I got a lot rice flow in the rings," it's nothing. Now that's scary to film directors who grew up having a studio in a garage.
but and to the point, like that's what you're just saying.
And then getting a store and then building it once.
But it's not a studio in a garage anymore. It's a studio in a computer box, right? That's what it is. You know, that's it. That's all you have. That's all you need. 3 or 4 people, and you have a whole studio in a box.
The fact that maybe there are. The fact is, this is the way I would go or advise people to go.
Yeah.
I'm sure of it. And if you start to this, you start to this, or at least you have some films. And I'm dead serious. I don't want to start to this, but at least you have that.
Yeah.
And that lasts forever. You could be 30 years later, you could sell your film and you still got it. Don't forget they're forever. If you don't sell this 10 years, you may sell it next 10 years.
Well, and so, to that point, you made your last short, which was the last days of Coney.
I don't want to talk about it.
We don't want to talk, but that's okay. But look at the platform you chose: Vimeo and Kickstarter, right?
That's right.
Right, and this is exactly what all the kids today have access to: is financing, public financing, and this platform where they can show it immediately.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or not public. I mean, public financing is great, but if you have a year. In a lifetime, if you could balance your budget with your wife and your kids and everyone, there are 4 or 5 people involved, is kind of doable potentially. If you all have to live in the same house together, I mean, those are the choices you make if you want to make your film.
Yeah.
If you all got together and lived in a loft for 1 year and all shared the cost while your husbands and your boyfriends worked on the film all day, that's a choice you make. That's no problem. If you grew up in Brownsville like I did and you were poor, only if you're spoiled and only if you're very wealthy and only if you're soft, you won't make that choice because you're spoiled. But if you're not spoiled and you take a little pain and you take a few hits to get your film done, so what? So many people are so afraid to take a punch once in a while to get something done. It's mind-boggling. Everyone is so afraid of being out of line, or saying the wrong thing, or not wearing the right dress. I mean, the social media thing is horrible. It's disgusting.
So we talked about Klaus earlier. What excites you today? What do you see today that excites you?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, some of the things, or a lot of the things I've seen done in computer animation are amazing. I mean, I think there is stuff done in computer animation visually that I never thought could ever be done to the degree I'm looking at. So that's interesting to me. Amazing. I think, well, nothing much. I've grown old. I'm 82. The thing I love very much are the old painters. I just love painting. I love the old artists. I love what they did with paint and canvas and how honest they were about what they did when they were honest. The Renaissance artists and various Winslow Homer and Edward Hopper and Degas. I am nuts. Lucian Freud, I am Soutine. I'm crazy over painters, and I study and I paint every day and I draw every day. And I'm all about draftsmanship and just drawing. I'm not interested too much in what's going on out there. The only thing I want to do is spend my time talking to you, and because I think you know what you're doing, and I know you know what you're doing, which is why I opened up in so many areas. The Coonskin story I told you was never said before. Too much trouble to try to get all of it. At any rate, what's most important to me is painting and drawing, and the greatness that humans can adhere to when they're worrying just about how things look aesthetically, and that's what they're concerned about, and not necessarily commercially only. The love of art is the only thing that seems to make any sense to me today, as opposed to what I'm looking at in the hate and the social media and all the things that are going on um, are despairing and not really conducive for living. So all I try to think is what is amazing, what I keep amazing is painting and art and drawing, and that's where I'm going out. I don't need anything else anymore, nor do I want anything else except talking to you because you asked me, and and somewhere I like Vancouver, you know.
Yeah, and we love you, Ralph. I have to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. There we go. We got a few attendees starting to come in.
What?
The room is starting to fill up. If
Okay,
you look
good.
at the participants there, Ralph, you'll see we got a few people in the Zoom
Better
room.
than mine. Mickey Mouse.
We'll just welcome them coming in as they slowly find their seats in the Zoom theater.
To the theater.
Welcome, everybody, to our second day of the Spark Animation Festival. Slowly filling up still. We got lots of room. My name is Keith Blackmore, and I'm one of the producers with the Spark Animation Festival. And with us today we have one of our greatest of guests, Ralph Bakshi. And we're going to be talking and asking questions of Ralph. And of course, you have the opportunity to talk with Ralph as well. Yeah, so, well, where is everybody from? Put it in the chat. We'd love to see your names and where you're from. I'm in Vancouver. Where are you in? Where are you, Ralph? Whereabouts are you?
New Mexico.
New Mexico. Nice.
Yeah, top of the mountain.
Nice. Zooming in from New Mexico. So we're going to be talking all things Bakshi and learning all about his career and the highlights, the lowlights, the good stuff, the bad, all the ugly stuff, everything that happened, we're going to ask. And today is...
How ugly? How ugly do you want it?
Well, if you want ugly, you have to just go to online. We had a 2-hour interview before, and you can learn more about that. That was good, some good stuff we did there. That was good.
I hope
All
so.
about coon skin and such.
I never know. I never know.
So, what I was going to say is, yeah, make use of the chat, and also I was going to mention that today is Ralph's birthday. How old are you today, Ralph?
83.
83, entering into his 84th year. Well, you're looking great, and you're still active painting. Everybody's wishing you a happy birthday in the chat here, so that's very
Thank
kind.
you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, let's start off with a couple of questions. When you have so much history, what was life growing up like in Brooklyn? That's where you're from. Let's talk a little bit about who you are as a man.
Well, okay. We'll talk a little bit about that, but it's more important for me to get questions so I can see what the kids or the people want to
Yeah,
learn about it, to learn.
exactly.
So
Ralph really
growing
wants
up in Brooklyn, growing up in Brooklyn was 80 years ago, 83 years ago. You know,
Okay, well, let's
so
not talk about Brooklyn then. Who cares about Brooklyn?
yeah,
Let's-
yeah. That's fine. I'll talk to it during the questions.
Okay, because that really lays a foundation for who you are culturally and politically, and the films that you would come to make,
That's right. That's
right?
right.
So what was
Right.
it that, yeah, what was it that affected you as growing up in Brooklyn?
Okay. First of all, so we're ready to roll it. Okay. First of all, as far as one's life goes, you can never duplicate. No one else could ever duplicate it because there are so many things happening in your own time period that will never happen before, and they're the things that make you do what you do. In other words, I'll try to do the best I could, but today's generation of animators don't have the problems I had or the kind of way I grew up. They're on their own in another area. So I'll try to be, that's why I like the questions. I'll try to answer as best I could. But I grew up in a period during World War II. I was born in 1938. So World War II was on. My parents had fled Germany and Russia to come to America as immigrants. All their family was killed by the Nazis. Uh, and I grew up in Brooklyn with this kind of pressure of understanding that life wasn't easy. In other words, what what I learned immediately during my time period was that life is not fair or just, and it could be dangerous. So absolutely that had to color what my thoughts were. And it absolutely colored my thoughts um, to the degree where I wasn't buying everything Disney was saying when I was a young animator, because it had nothing to do with what I was feeling. He's saying one thing, I'm feeling another thing. Now, um, the art of, so and Brooklyn itself was a hotbed of immigrants and gangsters, and very much integration. Everyone lived different people of different types and races and colors lived together in harmony. In other words, there was no everyone was as poor as the next guy, so there was no problem. And a cop would not be caught alive shooting anybody in those days because it wasn't mannish. In my time, you had to beat someone up with your fists, or you weren't much of a man. And my teachers in school, especially in junior high, which was an old boys' school, were veterans from World War II. And you're not going to mess around with them. So all these different combinations uh, certainly had to affect the way I was growing up and what I was thinking about. You know, I wasn't so Brooklyn was a very important. By the way, I love Brooklyn. It was absolutely great there because there was a sense of freedom, and I liked that everyone spoke to everyone else. I enjoyed that very much.
Yeah. So by the mid 60s, let's jump forward. By the mid 60s, you'd already been animating for about 15 years. You had this new opportunity to go to Paramount. At the age of 28, you are the head of Paramount and you start doing television. But there's also cultural changes that are happening in the 60s, the counterculture, drugs, hippies, even underground comics like Crumb and such. How did that affect you and your filmmaking and the idea of going into films? We think of as well what was happening. There was a Saturday morning cartoons and there was Disney.
Well, again, there is so much to discuss. Like I said,
Yeah.
uh, what affected me most, first of all, when I was growing up, I got a job out of high school, which was an art school. And I got a job at Terryton's because I had won the cartoon medal in high school. And they gave me a job, which was painting the cells. This is way before computers, no computers, and no Xerox machine that inked on cells. So they painted the cells. And then I learned to ink with a brush or a pen on cells. And that's how you work through the system. So I had this old school training. Now, during that period, animation was falling apart. You, the kids today or the young adults today cannot understand what dire straits we were in, which also affected how I thought. In other words, what does that mean? That means that all the short cartoon studios are closing. The guys that hired hundreds of animators and animated assistants, Warner Brothers, Paramount, Walter Lantz, all the short studios that you have books about were closing. And why were they closing? Was because you there was a decree put out by the Motion Picture Society that said a, a motion picture salesman had to make two trips. When he went to sell a feature film, he had to come back and then sell a short. In the old days, everyone went at once. In other words, the features and the shorts and the newsreels, the salesman took all of that into a meeting. Well, he didn't want to go back to sell a short. There was too little money in it. So all the short studios could not get sold, which is economics, and they collapsed. Okay, so what saved it? The animation was we were going to all be out of work any day. And that affected me because I was married at 20 and had a kid at 21. So I had my own apartment, which was a very big deal, and my own car. Uh, but so one gets frightened that way. So one starts to think, what can you one do to better that? In other words, to get around that. That again, that's Brooklyn training. In other words, or growing up, if you're in the city and you're an immigrant, you just try to survive. You don't give up. So that was part of my upbringing that may not be around in all the other people. So I'm being forced to feed my family. I'm being forced to observe animation collapsing. And the only thing that saved it was Hanna-Barbera started to sell television. And television became a thing. But I hated television animation. I loved it because it saved the industry to a point. We weren't healthy, but it wasn't about anything that I cared about. The type of person I had evolved to. Am I clear so far?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're painting a good picture of what it was from going from the 1950s into the 60s animation, from theatrical to television.
Yet now the only God and the only king of all and the master of the human race was Disney. And all his animators said that about themselves. They were very good animators until they became illustrators. I prefer cartoonists. I prefer the art of cartooning as opposed to illustration. And Disney certainly started in the art of cartooning brilliantly in the 30s. But when he got to Milt Kahl and everyone else, I was kind of fed up. It was like Ronald Searle illustration. It wasn't cartooning. And Sleeping Beauty to me was an absolute cold disaster. I like slapstick. I like old school. I love Terry Tunes. I love Warner. I love Fleischer. And as far as I'm concerned, so I'll talk more about that later. But so I resented that, and if the Disney's feeling that you needed a lot of money to do animation so brilliantly, no one else could afford to do it. In other words, no one else would even attempt to do an animated feature because Disney had the industry feeling, unless you had $24 million, which in that day was a fortune. I did Fritz for $700,000. Look at the difference.
Yeah.
That was their con job, though, as far as I was concerned, because my feeling is it's the idea that counts. It's not that you have to make it all great. That's why I love cartooning. Cartooning isn't the art of illustration or perfection. It's the art of, hey, let's have a good time. If you're not a cartoonist not having a good time, please go to Disney and animate. So one of my favorite animators was Jim Tyre, one of the great Terry Toons animators. And I think some animators out there might know who he is. I was his assistant, and he told me, Ralph, very important to my life, Jim Tyre. He said, Ralph, everything moves. Don't worry about it. I could put a cabbage in here and nobody will even see it. And he taught me not to care. He did almost every drawing in the scene with the animated straight ahead, but it was all distorted. So when it came time for me to say yes to doing Fritz at $700,000, I wasn't concerned with the perfection of it. I was concerned with getting it done. And getting it done with cartoonists, not getting it done with illustrators who sat there admiring their work forever. But understand, there was no other animation feature film studio. And all of the features trying to do what Disney did not have the money or the experience, but they had to do it Disney's way. Even Fleischer thought Disney was great, which I thought was ridiculous. But the Fleischer shorts, to me, were as great as anything ever done. So
Yeah.
it was me accepting the role of what a cartoon is as opposed to what an illustration is. Any sense? Does that make any sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I know a lot of
Can
the
someone ask me
backstory.
a question? Can someone ask me a question?
Oh yeah, here we got one question here. Here we go.
Good.
And again, for those ones in the audience, feel free to. Ralph is welcoming all your questions. Um, this is a good question. I
How
was
do
in.
you know?
Here you
How do
go.
you know?
I know this is a good one for
How
you.
do you know?
Here you go. How do you feel about the new media today? Is it too safe? It feels like we blurred the lines of satire, commentary, and true intent to offend. You know, they talk about cancel culture, and we're so sensitive today. We look at your films, Ralph, of Fritz the Cat and Coonskin and Heavy Traffic. What do you think of the state of animation today?
Well, uh, first of all, the state, I have a lot to say about that. First of all, the state of animation today, as far as a job goes, has never been better. If I grew up in a time when animation, I mean, when I did Fritz, I hired the best Disney, MGM, and Warner Brothers short animators, Irv Spence, the guys that did Daffy Duck. I mean, those guys were out of work. So as far as work goes, which is that's how bad things had gotten, you see, and that's why they needed a job. And I was lucky enough to hire them because I didn't want Disney perfection. I wanted that old style animation. So, okay, as far as jobs and money goes today, and I hear some animators are sharing, I think it's never been better. What's what's gotten back? Why? What's never been better, except the guys who used to control animation in my day, which were the producers and the studios and everything, are in charge again. There's other than the Canadian Film Board, which I looked at in the '60s, that animation was great. Those guys did what they wanted to do, and the different styles. I thought that was like a saving grace to the whole thing about animation. I think they're still out there doing great work, and that was one of the things I looked to was how creative each different film was. Um, McLaren and all the guys. There's a couple of so okay, so where am I? How do I think about the stadium?
Great. But when we look back in your day, because
I'm
you,
getting there, but I got to answer the question. I haven't answered it yet.
okay,
I haven't answered the question yet. Okay, so uh, the state of animation today. I am a great believer of freedom. I'm a great believer of being able to say whatever you want to whoever you want if you're an artist. I'm a very much an, if you're a cartoonist, you could say it any way you want to. So I'm a great believer of I want to do this, I want to write this, I want to say this. Don't tell me what to do, write, or say. I mean, why I wasn't making films necessarily for anyone else. I was making films to get stuff off of my chest. Understand, again, we go back to how I grew up. Now, I grew up in very difficult times. Immigrant, Hitler, war, so poverty. So what I'm saying is animation collapsing. My feeling was that if I get to do one feature film, I'll be so happy because no one did any feature films. If I did one, but I'm certainly going to do the one I want, not the one everyone thinks Disney would want. I'm not putting Disney down. I'm just saying there are other things to do besides what he was doing, and and claiming that that was the only thing to do. Of course, in my time, uh, the Motion Picture Society had got ratings. There were PG films, G films, and R films, and X films. So whatever I was doing was rated. So I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't trying to hide under the cover of anything. And any movie I did when Fritz was X-rated and R-rated on the rest, I wasn't hiding that, and that should have alerted everyone. But I still got yelled at it. Why am I? Why am I hurting animation by doing this garbage? Now, when I'm so I don't agree with any of the cancel culture stuff and everything. I don't agree. Everyone's a victim, and everyone's got to get together. Or this planet's going to end in one hot fireball. In other words, sides are getting so separated today. I look at this in astonishment, and as far as values go, I look into what's going on. The madness of the Afghan wars and all the overseas wars. Now we're ready to fight over Taiwan. That's insane. The people on that island are Chinese. So, how would we feel if it's Cuba? Well, I mean, it's nuts. So I don't agree with anything that's going on. But the cancel culture is really hurting creativity, hurting. Everyone's looking over their shoulder, and the internet has got this group of people that the internet lives, and Facebook and all that, and how much you could disagree with the next guy, or how much you could yell at the next guy. So everyone's looking to scream at everybody.
Yeah.
It's pretty horrible, and people don't want to get screamed at, so they start to change their attitudes, I think. So you could have it. In other words, I'm a great believer, like in the 60s, of Miles Davis and the freedom we had to experiment, the freedom to make a mistake. Um, I don't know exactly what everything that's going on, but what I'm reading is astonishing.
Yeah.
But what's happening to the world is astonishing.
And you look, actually, you were probably the original, one of the original animators to have experienced cancel culture. I think of your film Coonskin. Now that's a satirical crime film. The name was changed, but do you want to tell the audience about the experience in screening that in New York at the museum?
But again, there's a whole history
Hmm.
um, to everything that happens. Nothing you could short circuit everything. Uh, Coonskin was basically you could it, Harlem Nights was the original title that I had.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Harlem Nights.
Harlem Nights.
That's right.
Al Ruddy, the producer who produced The Godfather, was a very powerful producer. Was producing Coonskin. Why he bought Coonskin for me is beyond my understanding, but he did. Okay, he changed the title to Coonskin. I asked him why. He said he wanted something more outrageous. Then every studio had a black person in it to make sure that there wasn't racist elements in films, and that was fine with me. So he had a meeting with Al and me when the film was finished, and asked if I could change the title. I said, no problem. I'll go back to my original title. Al Ruddy threw him out of the office, told him off, told him he's not going to change anything, blah, blah, blah. Um, and I was screening at the Museum of Modern Art the next day or 2 days after. And he had called his friends in New York, Al Sharpton. And Al Sharpton got his first gig, which was boycotting my film in the Museum of Modern Art by screaming at me from the back of the, having never seen the film, screaming at me from the back of the audience. Paramount got cold feet, the releasing company, and dropped the film because Al Sharpton had all the elevators at Paramount Pictures executive offices in New York. He had them all blocked. The executives couldn't get out, and all the executives kept asking me, "Oh, it's Bakshi. What if it's Bakshi?" I never spoke to Al Ruddy again. He could have said yes to the guy. We would never have that controversy. Black audiences love Coonskin. Rappers love. I think I might have created rap for all I know. So I was happy I made it. I have no problem. It came down very hard, but that's the story of Coonskin.
Yeah.
So again, it wasn't exactly cancel culture. It was idiocy on a producer, arrogant producer, a Paramount Pictures who had no guts at the time to say this is just one theater, one screening that people are yelling at. Anyhow, Marty Scorsese was filming Taxi Driver at the time, his live action movie, and he was driving past one of the theaters on Broadway that opened up Coonskin, and he sent me a reel of film that was shooting street shots of New York mayhem on a B camera, and he sent me a reel of people rioting in front of the Coonskin.
Outside the MoMA.
I got that. I have that. And I also have on tape the Museum of Modern Art on tape. I've heard it has me finding when Al Sharpton calling him a sellout. That because this was such a pro-black film.
Well, that's the
Not that
irony.
that's the irony. That's the politics. That's
Yeah.
what happened. That's what cancel culture could do. I mean, basically, that's exactly what you're talking about. You could be right, and they could still kick you out of school.
Yeah. Now, before we talk about our your next question, I want to show you this. This is from show our audience. This is from one of your films of the '60s, '70s, early '70s.
70s. Hey, good looking.
Hey, good looking.
That
There's the rough. There's the rough.
that's not a rough. That's an animator's
Oh, that's
drawing
okay. That's the anime. Okay, and
done
here's
by finished by an assistant by Irvin Spence, one of the
and
great Irvin Spence did all the Tom and Jerry animation.
yeah,
Now
there's
that's an old-fashioned cell. That's Xeroxed on cell and painted by hand.
yeah,
That's
there.
old school.
Yeah, there we go. No glare.
Give it back to me.
Forget it. It's mine. Fantasy films. You started getting into fantasy films, and you did a lot of them. I mean, Wizards, Fire and Ice, Lord of the Rings. Let's talk. One of the questions we have here. Um, I remember being fascinated and scared by Lord of the Rings when I was a child. Can you talk a bit about how this project came about and the design and aesthetic of the film from Allison?
Okay, Allison. Uh, I was doing Wizards and very much into fantasy. I had read all the Rings books when they came out. The Rings books in the 60s started underground in New York City, and there wasn't an artist or a creator in the world that didn't hear about it or read it. It was all underground until it broke big. I had read it. I had heard from Vaughn Bodie, one of my favorite cartoonists.
Yep.
Um,
Wizards.
um, he said, "Have you read The Rings yet?" I said, "What? Is it about a wedding?" He said, "No, no, you got to read it." So I read it. I read it every issue. I couldn't wait for it to come out, and I absolutely thought it was the greatest thing I ever read. Now I grew up reading fantasy. My friend was Frank Frazetta. He painted fantasy. So Roy Krinkle was a friend of mine. He also drew fantasy. So I was Wally Wood worked with me at Paramount Pictures. He too. So I was very much into comic book artists and cartoonists. Um, so basically, I read. So I'm sitting in my studio having read Rings and being crazy about it, um, and never thought of making it. When I read in the Variety something I could not believe, and that was that there was a director. I'm not going to mention his name; he's still alive. There was a director from United Artists who had gotten paid $3 million to do the screenplay, that would do the movie, and he decided to take all the books and put it into one picture, which is ridiculous. And more, other than that, he said he's also going to add some characters of his own to make it work. So I got incensed with that. You can't do that. I got to protect Tolkien. So I went to United Artists. I had a meeting with the owner, and I asked him what the hell he thinks he's doing with this picture. He says, "Ralph, we don't want to make this picture. We don't understand this picture. We didn't even read the books, but we spent $3 million on this. So if you get us our money back, I'll give you the rights." I said, "For nothing?" Because I didn't have any. He said, "Yes, you can have the rights. We don't get it." Now, you can't make this up, but again, we're back to Brooklyn. You've asked me the earlier question on Brooklyn. Across the hall from United Artists was a studio called MGM. Remember them? And MGM, they were sharing space. That's how bad things were in Hollywood. Um, MGM did all the musicals and everything, but the guy running MGM had just done all that jazz and had just done the music about singing and dancing with all the famous actors. He was a very intellectual guy. So I went across the hall into his office and told the secretary to tell him I'm out here with the rights to Lord of the Rings. He says he's busy. I say, "Okay, he's busy, but if you don't tell him," I said, "I'm going to tell him one day that Ralph was here with the rights to Lord of the Rings, and you let him walk out, he's going to fire you." So the girl says, "Okay, wait a minute." So she calls into the Danny Melnick's office, who was the head of MGM. She says, "Ralph's here with the rights to Lord of the Rings." There was a pause. The door from the office swung open. And Dan Melnick stepped out and he said, "Do you have the rights to Lord of the Rings?" I said, "Yep." He said, "Come right in. I'm going to break this meeting up I'm with." So he's meeting with a director who's trying to pitch Dan Melnick a movie. And the director happens to be Peter Bogdanovich. And Peter Bogdanovich, who's walking out the door, says, was so furious at me, he says, "I'll never speak to you again, Ralph." I said, "It was not my fault, it's Danny's choice." I never did speak to him again. And anyhow, well, make a long story short, Danny bought the rights, gave United Artists their 3 million back. I go back to start the Lord of the Rings with Danny. Danny Melnick gets fired. The new guy that takes over MGM says, Lord of the what? He says, we don't want to make this stupid picture. He says, we don't want to make it. And by the way, they gave me $250,000. Danny did to start the film. The film's budget originally was $8 million, and that's what I made the film for, which was dirt cheap for that kind of film. Anyhow, I had to call Saul Zentz made a fortune on Fritz the Cat. He did the music for Fritz the Cat. He ran fantasy films. He was a backer of. He did the music for Fritz. He was one of the financial backers of Fritz. Fritz was put together the old-fashioned way by a lot of different investors. In my day, we had different investors come in and put $100,000. That's why $700,000 was a lot of money to raise, and that's why I was able to make the film. So Saul was and the film made fortune. So Saul made a lot of money. He also knew the rig. Saul was a very bright guy. He had his Fantasy Records was a jazz label, and he also was Creedence Clearwater was one of his record stars, and he was making a fortune on Creedence. So he was doing quite well. So he came right down that day on a plane from San Francisco and went to my lawyer, and he gave me the money for the movie.
Wow.
All in a couple of days.
And you ended up
without an agent. That's without an agent. I had no agent, nobody. But see, in my day, which is different than today, we come from a different culture. You can walk around and shake someone's hand. It's a deal. You can walk into an office and say, I'd like to see this guy. It wasn't, but those of us that worked that way, those of us that grew up at the junior high school that was old boys with teachers that were soldiers, it wasn't any big deal because you could live through if you could live being taught by an ex-Marine who was crazy from World War II, you could probably live with anything. Understand what I'm talking about when your time is your time. It never could be the same. I could never do today what I did then. There is no way that I get past the producers and everything. The establishment today, they would see me coming. They would know I was trouble. In my day, no one understood that animation was anything, that anything other than Disney was going to work. They paid no attention to me. You have to understand, I got away with a lot of stuff because they didn't care. Yeah. And they all thought it was going to be funny. They were shocked like crazy when some of it was funny and a lot of it was not. But that's the story of Lord of the Rings. I went to England. I told Tolkien's daughter, that was my idea of how I was going to make the film. I wanted her approval, and I told Tolkien's son how I was going to make the film. They approved it, and I went home and started the movie.
Wow. Well, and that was a lot of it was rotoscoped. You did live action shots in Spain.
Yeah.
And it was all rotoscoped. And you continue to do rotoscoping in your films.
Well, look, go ahead.
Well, I have a question here about Cool World, for example. This one question here from one of our attendees. They grew up with Cool World as a major inspiration, especially the artwork and the aesthetic of the characters. What was the drive behind the look of that film?
Well, first of all, it's a very good question. Let me talk about the looks of a film. Okay, I think it's to the artists out there. And again, this goes back to Jim Tyer's philosophy, who I love dearly, the animator, who I was an assistant for. He was an animator at Terry Toons. Look on YouTube. Look up Jim Tyer animation. You'll see something you've never seen before. Just look it up. And it's not rotoscope. It's all hand drawn. I grew up in a period in the 50s and the 60s where wasn't buying Disney, where one style and one overall style has got to be for the whole film. The entire film needs one style. Everyone's drawn the same. Everything looks the same. I grew up loving. I went out of the animation industry. Here we go. To understand how I felt and to understand that Disney did not I'm using it as a metaphor. I'm also talking about most of the animation. I'm using only animation as a guide to what to do, and only animation critics who were all Disney lovers and said this is the only way, and floppy anime. You know, I thought that the arts were the only way to go. The only way I could learn how to do my kind of animation, which was both political and social and just raunchy and crazy, which I was definitely, um, was to go out of was to go out of the areas that everybody was. It was all the same cancel culture. Every either Disney, either you look at the style, it's great. I mean, Snow White was one of the ugliest films I've ever seen. As great as the art was, it was not cartoon. So I went to photographers. In the 50s and 60s, there were great street photographers. Diane Arbus, Ouija, the newspaper photographer, uh, Helen Levitt. I mean, there were great photographers, European. I loved the black and white photography. Then I went to see foreign movies. La Strada blew me away. As far as a movie goes, you talk about strength in my time and being different from Pillow Talk with Rock Hudson and Doris Day. You know, uh, it was such a revelation to me that this film could be made. I thought it was absolutely nice. In all of Fellini's earliest films, you know. So I was looking at films, I was looking at photography, I was looking at painters, Hopper, Reginald Marsh, Homer, some of the abstract guys. So I was looking at different artistic venues to use as guides instead of a milk call drawing. Hmm. And also what I learned and believed from Jim Tye, that everything works and everything moves, I didn't care. I thought that each sequence could have its own emotional content. They didn't have to be the same design. So some sequences had photographic backgrounds, and some sequences had one style, and some sequences had another style. And I melded all of that. You know, look at Wizards, you know, the various styles. So but you have to do that in a way that has a rhythm. And I can't explain to you in such a short time what a rhythm is, but you have to make it all move in and out of each other so that it doesn't jar. So we kind of, you know, so at the end of a painted sequence, I start to put little animated collages in the painted backgrounds, because the next scene was going to be live action. I was getting the audience used to what the next sequence is going to be. So I learned how to roll it and smooth it out. Now, so it's not just cut, you know, so it needs a blending, just like all paintings are blending. Now, I had another advantage, which is very important, which no one else had. I'm not such a big shot, except I couldn't do it today, and here's why. In my day, it was impossible. I owned my own studio. I directed my own pictures. I wrote my own pictures, right? I did most of my own storyboards. So what I'm saying is I had total control. There was no one there that could say no to me. I didn't have a boss that I could send my storyboards and says, you can't do that. I would change the script on a whim. Whatever I hand into the motion picture company was dead on arrival when the picture started. Because when you start to picture, other things happen. You say, well, I can't do that anymore. I got to do this. But I don't have to tell them. They don't care. So the point is, nobody had such control as I had. You know, to produce and direct your own feature film in your own studio with your wife handing out the checks, you know, and all the animators, they're loving you because they can't believe what we're doing. You have to understand, my animators were so happy. They could not believe. I had animators come to the door of my room and they'd say to me, you really want me to do this? I said, yeah. No, Ralph, do you really want me to do this? I said, yeah. All right, I'll really do it. And some of them really did it. So, I had a great advantage, which again was my Brooklyn background. I mean, you grow up surviving, having your own, or maybe it was a plan and a plot I always had. I'm not clear. It was also very difficult. never had enough money. We worked I had two layout men for a feature film. I had one other storyboard man. You know, we were that's also my dogs. We were very understaffed, but my feeling that just get it done was more important than how well it's done. Everyone loves quality. I love quality, but I don't want to not do something because I can't get the quality. Get the picture finished, guys. Have fun, enjoy yourself. But we did. We loved it. We had an absolute ball in my studio. Um, but again, that's part of my time. That can never happen again. If I went to a studio today, they'd throw me out the front door. The cancel culture would cancel me on arrival. I mean, I wouldn't get past the secretary.
Well, and you'd be getting sheets and sheets of notes to change this and change that along the way.
Yeah, but notes. Yeah, a Mighty Mouse. I never sent a script to CBS. Nobody could believe it. I called them. We were doing scripts on Mighty Mouse and New Adventures, and I just told the head of CBS, "Look, you don't need the script." Or they give me notes, and I throw the notes out. I mean, I was a crazy guy. I guess I was a little egotistical, but if you want to get certain things done, you've got to take action.
Yeah. Right? Got to be a man. Okay, here's another question from the audience here. What films are on your must-watch, or what books are on your must-read recommendations? What films excited you today?
Oh, so many. Let me think about that one because I'm 83 today.
Yeah.
There are a lot of books and stuff, but somehow nothing's popping up. I saw some brilliant films lately, absolutely brilliant. One of the films I like very much is Claws, the
Claws.
animated. Not my style, beautifully done, but really done with heart and soul, and was great. And lost the Academy Award. It was nominated to Toy Story 5. So this great feature film that gets an Academy Award. It's different, brilliantly done by a brilliant animator. Done traditional animation, done with computer selling work. It's just great. Lost it to Toy Story 5. 5. How do you take that? Who would do 5 of the same pictures? You better get good at it because after 5 tries, you should get one right.
Yeah, well, there's a good example. Casey's asking, when we look at the nature of streaming in that, everything seems to be getting conglomerated. There's everything's coming under the Disney umbrella. We see Star Wars, Marvel, Pixar. Are we in danger of having our culture locked up by copyright and owned by big media?
Well, of course. Well, of course.
What's your observations on that?
I'm in danger of getting my country overtaken by the right wing and madness. Absolutely. That's why I said I went naked today. This is exactly what's going on. Billionaires and millionaires in my country don't pay taxes. Unbelievable. I mean, no one plays it fair anymore. If you look, and what's also happened, to my amazement, is the amount of racism that I could not believe existed today. And the shooting of Black people, and no one going to jail. I mean, there's been more obstruction of justice in my country than I've ever seen in my life, and it just goes on, and no one gets convicted. I think everything's under tight control, especially during the big tech companies and Facebook with disinformation on there. That's a disaster. People are told all the wrong things, and you know what? They believe it. They don't research it. I think it's a disaster going on alongside COVID and global warming. I'm very concerned. That's why I animate and paint pictures. It makes me happy.
Yeah. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
creating.
absolutely.
You're still painting. You're still painting. That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, it's always been about drawing. It's always about drawing. Animation was about drawing. It's about drawing. If you're not drawing, you're not doing anything. You know, it doesn't matter whether you're drawing or animating or painting. It's, to me, it's the art of drawing that means everything.
Mhm. Let's go back a bit, revisit those days at Paramount and television. You created a series to maybe talk little bit about your role. At the young age of 28, you became the creative head of Paramount, and you're doing
Cherry
cartoons,
tunes.
Terry tunes now. Yeah. So,
You want to hear
Mighty
what
Heroes.
Okay, so I'm a young animator. I'm working for Terry Tunes. I forget what year, in the 60s, 62, 63, I forget. I was there at least 8 years, 5 years. I was a young animator. Um, very happy with that job. I thought I was ripping everyone off. I mean, you come into work, you put a Frank Sinatra record on, you sit there doing animation, pencil drawings. It's heaven. I mean, what could be a better life? I mean, right? Um, and if so, this is what I'm doing for a living, and they're paying me a lot of money, I mean, relative to other workers, you know. So, um, anyhow, so Terry Tunes could not sell anything to television. Terry Tunes was owned by CBS. Terry Tunes sold to CBS. So my boss was CBS, the station. Terry Tunes could not sell anything to the daytime programming, but the guy that was the head of daytime programming for CBS was buying everything from Hanna-Barbera. Yogi Bear and Harry the Hound and all that stuff was coming in. Terry Tunes, who was owned by CBS, could not sell a series to their own network station owner, which was ridiculous. And they were going out of business. Theatricals were dead. They couldn't make features because they didn't have the Disney money or the Disney animators, so they didn't even try. Uh, um, and all the guys at Terry Tunes were old cartoonists and some young kids. Anyhow, Gene Deitch was running Terry Tunes. No, he wasn't. Yes, he was. I don't remember. But the boss at no, Deitch was gone. The boss at Terry, he was thrown out the door because uh, his culture got canceled quick. So, uh, so, the boss, Bill Weiss, went to CBS and was screaming at the CBS executives that they're closing the studio. It's their studio, and Fred Silverman has not borne anything and should be fired or should buy something. And he's right. He's right. I mean, so he's given a lot of money by CBS to get a lot of ideas together to pitch at a major meeting to Fred Silverman. All the CBS executives are going to show up, and Fred Silverman, and they give, I think, $250,000 or $300,000 in those days was a ton of money to hire various artists to create ideas. They hired the best artists in New York. They hired Blackman, and they hired Jules Pfeiffer, and you name it was on the hit list. And these guys created all these shows. They were in the studio doing the show, storyboards, drawings, you know, script. And presentations, the big pictures of what these things look like. And now the day arrives 6 months, 7 months later, when they're going to have this big meeting, and everyone is on pins and needles. So Weiss, who liked me, I think I was the only other Jew in the place. So, but lucky enough, he was the boss. So, I'm serious. You can't make this stuff up, you know. So, so he invites me to bring the presentations into the meeting, which there's a lot of them. I was 6'2" or 6'3" and very strong. And my job was to put them all together, drive them to New York and set them up around the room. Then when the meeting's over, put them back and take them home. Fine. You know, I never saw a meeting before in New York. So I bring the stuff up and I go to CBS and I put it around the room and everything's standing beautiful. I must admit I set them up right. And now, and now everyone files on this long table, people on both sides, executives, artists, Weiss, Fred Silverman, right? And they start pitching the ideas. An hour later, Fred had turned down every idea. There might have been 10 or 12. Every idea was turned down. And the room got deathly quiet. And Fred started to lift and leave the office. It was done. Now, for some reason, I felt guilty. Somehow it was my fault. I don't know why I should feel that. Or somehow I was smarter than I thought I was, but I didn't let myself know. And anyhow, as he was leaving the office, I was still in the back, very depressed because Weiss, or who I liked, and all the guys were just devastated and scared. This was the end of the studio. This is the end of the studio. Now, understand that's another motivator. I got a family, I'm married, I got a kid. This is the end of the studio. No money, no. So as Fred was leaving, I said, I have an idea. I have an idea. He stops and looks, who are you? I said, I have an idea. He says, all right, what is it? And from the back of the room, without any prior knowledge, I pitched the Mighty Heroes. There was Diaper Man, there was Strong Man. Now, that was no big deal to me because I was smart. I had read Mad Comics. And Mad Comics, that's all Mad Comics was doing. I grew up in the 50s on Mad Comics, which was a major revolution in art school. You know, Wallywood and all those artists I loved were doing it all the time. They were doing Archie and Starchy. And so I pitched all these superheroes as idiots, right? One right after the other. And he sat down and he said, I love it. I'll buy it. Now, that never happened before, but again, we're back to the same thing I did on Lord of the Rings. You see how things are the same with me?
Yeah.
When I went back to the studio, besides everyone patting me on the back and smashing my shoulder like I just caught an Aaron Rodgers touchdown in Super Bowl, the call comes in from Silverman, who says, the only way I'll sell this to you if Ralph runs the whole studio and directs the whole thing. I said, okay. Why said, okay. Everyone said, why not?
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. We have
What?
to end this. This has been awesome. I can't believe it's been an hour already.
Nobody asked me a question. There's someone sitting
Oh no,
there.
we've got
There's no one sitting
but
there.
I'm what I'm going to do. I'm going to invite our audience to go onto our conference page, and there's a full 2 hours of Ralph telling more stories.
No. Why don't you ask me some more questions?
Well, unfortunately, we have another program.
I want to make sure that they get what they need. My story is my story, but I want them. There's one more question that's important to anybody out there.
Okay, one more question from a young person, a young artist.
Good.
How can I balance maintaining my vision as an artist with actually finding work? What advice would you have for young artists?
You see, that's why I wanted. That's why my talking is not as important as these questions. These are the questions that count. It's tricky. You got to go. You got to go to. Don't forget, I did the same thing. You got to get any job you could anywhere in an animation company. It's very important you stay close to what's happening. And when you get home at night, which is what I did, be very careful. And you get home on weekends, you start doing your own work, your own ideas. You don't stop working. So you try to get a job. Eating is important. I'm not saying that I was terrified about losing my job, which made me do other things. But you can't stop until you succeed. And because what I think is good today is the availability of Netflix and all these venues that may buy something from you. So the stuff you're doing on the weekends and at nights till you can't see anymore, then you go find an agent if you could to take the work around and try to sell it. The possibility of you selling it, if you're good, it's 50-50. If you sell it, you open up your own studio and do it. That's my advice. But the thing is, you can't play ivory tower. You got to work all day and earn a living and pay yourself and learn what's going on in the animation industry. And you got to go home at nights and weekends so you exhaust yourself and do your own work. That's the way I did it. I did all this work at night that I'm talking about during the day. So I learned how to animate at nights when I didn't know how to animate. I went home and just practiced. So It's up to you to keep going at it until you faint, die, or get it made. If you have the desire. If you don't have the desire, get a good job, make a lot of money, and enjoy it. I mean, it's a question of desire. You know what I'm saying? It's a question of, do I really want to say this? Is it that important to me? A lot of guys I know making very big deal bucks in these big studios, and they're very happy. They got Rolls Royces and Mercedes and God knows what in LA. You know, uh, I'd rather make my film the way I wanted to make it than do that. But that's a choice. If you want to live by a pool, take a good job. If you want to do your own stuff, do it at nights. Do it when you have the time to do it. There is no other way.
That's it. Ralph Bakshi, it is a pleasure. It's always a pleasure having you. We look forward to doing this all over again. And again, I'm going to remind our...
I know you don't. I'll be dead by then. No, you don't. No, 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 no. No, no, no. Don't get tricky with me, guy. I ain't coming back. This is it. My birthday. I'm 83. Go away. I hope the kids make it. I love animation. Watch out for cancer. But things will change again. No, what's happening now will change. The world is burning up. Something else will happen. I think it's important animation talk to the problems we're having.
There you go. Thanks for everything, Ralph.
One last thing. Do a great anti-Facebook film in animation. That would be hysterical. Someone out there's an idea. Do an anti-Facebook film in cartooning what goes on in that company. You'll make $1 billion trillion. You guys should get together and do it.
We better do this again. Thanks, Ralph.
No,
have a great day.